It was a busy evening at the Elegant restaurant, where the rich and famous often dined. The soft lighting, the fancy decorations, and the hum of conversation created an atmosphere of luxury and comfort. The restaurant had a reputation for offering the best service, and it attracted a steady stream of wealthy clients. The staff, dressed neatly in black uniforms, moved through the room gracefully, making sure everything was perfect. Among the guests that evening, there was a young woman sitting at a table with her friends. She was dressed in expensive clothes, her jewelry sparkling in the dim light. She carried herself with an air of superiority, as if she belonged to a different world altogether. Her laughter echoed loudly across the room, a clear sign that she felt very much at home in this world of wealth and privilege. At the other end of the restaurant, there was a young woman working hard to make sure everything ran smoothly. She was a waitress, and this was her second week on the job. She had just finished a long shift at another job to make ends meet and was now doing everything she could to prove herself. She didn't mind the long hours or the demanding customers. She was determined to succeed and build a better life for herself. She was proud of the job she had, even if it meant facing difficult people. The young woman approached the table where the wealthy girl and her friends sat. With a warm smile, she greeted them politely, taking their orders with grace. Despite her smile, she could feel the tension in the air. The rich girl's eyes were on her, sizing her up. It wasn't just the look of someone ordering food. It was as if she was judging her every move, almost as if she was above it all. The waitress, trying her best to stay focused, carried out her duties with professionalism. She could hear the quiet whispers and the occasional laugh from the table, but it wasn't the noise that bothered her. It was the way the rich girl looked at her, as if she didn't belong in this kind of place. The waitress had been through so much in her life, and though she felt the sting of the girl's gaze, she refused to let it break her spirit. She had worked hard to get here, coming from a humble background where money was always tight, and every opportunity felt like a fight. But she had big dreams and believed that one day, all her efforts would pay off. She had no intention of letting anyone, no matter how rich or entitled, make her feel small. Little did she know that the evening was about to take a surprising turn, one that would leave everyone in the room speechless. As the waitress continued to serve the table, she couldn't help but notice how the wealthy girl was behaving. At first, it was subtle. Small comments here and there, an occasional glance that made her feel out of place. But soon, the remarks started to get louder, more pointed. The wealthy girl began making fun of the way the waitress was dressed. She laughed, claiming that she could never imagine working in such a uniform, as though it was beneath her. Her friends joined in, adding to the mockery with snide giggles and dismissive glances. The waitress, despite feeling the sting of the insults, did her best to stay composed. She had learned to ignore such things over the years. Her past had taught her how to put up with judgment, and while it wasn't always easy, she'd grown, strong from it. She had worked in a lot of places before this job, and people had often looked down on her for not having the same privileges as them. But this time, it was different. The way the girl was speaking, so openly and without care, made the waitress feel like she was invisible, as if she didn't even deserve to be in the same room. The wealthy girl didn't stop there. She started commenting on the waitress's background, asking her if she even knew what it was like to live in luxury, making the kind of sarcastic remarks that could cut deep. "I bet you don't even know what real style is," she said loudly, while flipping her hair back. "Do you even know what a designer bag looks like? Or are you happy with whatever you can afford?" Her friends giggled, exchanging looks of amusement. It was clear they all thought the same. This waitress was simply someone to look down on. At that moment, the waitress felt a rush of emotions. She had been working long hours, dealing with demanding customers, and juggling her own struggles. Yet here was someone who felt entitled to treat her like nothing more than a servant. But instead of reacting in anger, she took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't let herself be broken down by such words. She had bigger dreams, bigger goals than to let a few insults get in the way. She remembered the struggles she had faced in the past, growing up with little money, watching her family work hard just to survive, always feeling like she was never quite good enough in the eyes of others. But she also remembered how far she had come. She had fought for every little piece of success she had earned, and nothing, not even the cruel words of this spoiled girl, could take that away from her. The wealthy girl's insults continued, but this time the waitress didn't feel as small. Instead, she felt something else, an unexpected fire in her heart, a quiet strength that had been growing inside her all along. And as the girl's voice grew louder, something inside the waitress shifted. She was ready to speak up. Omnithers, waitress stood quietly, listening to the wealthy girl's voice ring out with each insult. Each comment felt like a heavy weight, but as she looked around the restaurant, she began to think about her own life, where she had come from, and everything she had fought through to get to this point. Growing up, things had never been easy. She didn't have the luxury of private schools or expensive vacations. Instead, she spent her childhood in a small, cramped house where every penny counted. Her family struggled just to keep the lights on, and there were days when even a simple meal was a stretch. She had learned from a very young age the value of hard work and sacrifice. Her parents, despite their own struggles, always made sure to teach her that effort and kindness mattered more than wealth or status. They always told her, it doesn't matter where you come from, but where you're going. Even when things were tough, she never let the challenges break her. She worked multiple part-time jobs throughout high school, sometimes juggling more than one at a time. It wasn't easy, but it taught her how to manage her time and focus on what really mattered. Her dreams. She didn't want to stay stuck in a cycle of poverty. She wanted to rise above it. And though it often seemed like the world was set against her, there was a part of her that believed things could get better if she worked hard enough. When she started working at the restaurant, it was another step towards something bigger. She didn't see it as just a job. She saw it as an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to be around people who were successful in different ways. There were days when she felt out of place among the well-dressed, well-spoken guests, but she didn't let that stop her. She reminded herself that she was just as deserving of being there as anyone else. The rich girl's words, however, brought back memories of the days when she felt invisible, when people would assume things about her based on how she looked or where she came from. It was a familiar feeling, one she had faced countless times before. But tonight, as the girl's insults continued to hit their mark, something inside her shifted. She was no longer that quiet, uncertain girl from her past. She was stronger now, more confident in herself and her worth. She had learned to embrace her journey, and while she would never forget where she came from, she also knew she was no longer defined by it. The wealthy girl's words still stung, but now they didn't hold the power they once did. She had worked too hard, overcome too much, to let anyone diminish her value. The waitress took a deep breath and stood a little taller, ready to stand up for herself. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted. What had started as a typical night of serving customers in an upscale setting was now filled with an undercurrent of tension. The wealthy girl continued to make her mocking comments, oblivious to the impact they were having on the waitress. Her voice, dripping with arrogance, echoed in the room, and it was clear she was enjoying the attention she was getting from her friends. The group was laughing, oblivious to the uncomfortable situation they were creating for the young waitress. Waitress could feel her heart race as the insults kept coming. Each one felt like a dagger aimed directly at her pride, but she held her ground. She had worked in all kinds of environments before, but this felt different. The wealthy girl wasn't just insulting her for her job, she was insulting her for who she was, her background, her struggle, her very existence. And that, more than anything, stung. But as she stood there, serving drinks and clearing plates, something inside her shifted. She could see the people at the nearby tables watching the scene unfold. Some of them were looking away, pretending not to notice, while others seemed uncomfortable but didn't dare speak up. A few glanced at the waitress, perhaps hoping she would just ignore the situation. But there was a moment when everything seemed to stand still. The room, though filled with chatter, suddenly felt quiet. It was as if the waitress had become the center of attention, and she knew in that moment that things were about to change. She couldn't stay silent anymore. For too long, she had allowed people to judge her, to define her by her job, her clothes, and her background. But tonight, as the wealthy girl continued to belittle her, something snapped. It wasn't just about defending herself. It was about taking back her dignity. She wasn't going to let anyone make her feel less than she was, especially not someone who had no idea what it meant to struggle, to fight for every opportunity. The wealthy girl had no idea what the waitress had been through. She had no idea what it was like to watch your parents struggle, to grow up in a small house with barely enough to eat. She didn't know the value of hard work or the determination it took to rise above life's challenges. The waitress knew that she had worked hard to get here, to this moment in time, and no one could take that away from her. Not the wealthy girl, not her friends, and certainly not anyone else who thought they were superior because of their wealth. As she took another deep breath, she made up her mind. She was going to say something. She was going to stand up for herself, not just for her dignity, but for the dignity of everyone who had ever been looked down on. She was ready. The room was silent, waiting to see how she would respond. The moment had come. The waitress could feel the weight of the room's attention on her. The rich girl's voice had softened a little, but the arrogance was still there, like a cloud hovering over their conversation. Her friends were still chuckling, their eyes glued to the waitress, waiting for her to either smile awkwardly and walk away or to react with frustration. But the waitress wasn't going to do either. She had spent so many years swallowing her pride, keeping her feelings to herself, and allowing people to make assumptions about her. But now, standing in front of this girl, with all the history and all the weight of her own struggles behind her, she felt something change inside. The words came to her, clear and steady. She took a deep breath and then, with a calmness that surprised even her, she spoke up. "I may not have the kind of life you think is important, but that doesn't mean my life is any less valuable than yours." The wealthy girl's smile faltered for a moment, and the laughter from the table seemed to die down. The waitress continued, her voice even but firm. "I come from a place where people work hard every single day just to make ends meet. I've watched my parents struggle. I've worked multiple jobs to support myself through school, and I've fought for every step I've taken. So don't stand there and tell me that I don't know what it means to work for something." The silence in the room deepened. The friends at the table glanced at each other, unsure of how to react. The wealthy girl's eyes widened as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. She had expected the waitress to be intimidated, to apologize, to stay silent. But instead, the waitress's words were like a shield, a strong and unshakable wall that she had built for herself over the years. "You think that your fancy clothes and your expensive bags make you better than me," the waitress went on. "But let me tell you, they don't. You may have money, but I have something far more valuable, respect for others, and the strength to stand tall no matter what life throws at me." The wealthy girl, taken aback by the sudden shift in power, opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She didn't know what to say. For the first time, she was faced with someone who wasn't intimidated by her wealth, who didn't care about her status. The waitress wasn't just a server to her anymore. She was a person, someone who had lived a full life with struggles, victories, and a story of her own. And in that moment, the waitress realized something powerful. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Her worth wasn't tied to the opinions of people like the wealthy girl. The rich girl finally fell silent, her smirk disappearing. The room was still, and the only sound was the soft clinking of glasses from another table. The waitress, with one final glance, turned to walk away. She had made her point, and in doing so, she had found her own strength, a strength that came from knowing who she was and where she had come from. The wealthy girl, who had once tried to belittle her, was now speechless, and the power in that silence was louder than any insult could ever be. The room remained completely still. The wealthy girl was left speechless, her mouth slightly open, as if she had lost her ability to speak. The other patrons of the restaurant, who had been quietly observing the interaction, seemed to hold their breath in the silence. No one knew exactly what to do but everyone could feel the shift. The waitress had just said something that no one expected, and it had changed the energy in the room completely. The young woman who had been so quick to judge, so eager to look down on someone else, was now caught off guard. The words the waitress had spoken weren't just a response. They were a declaration of strength, a message that resonated with everyone who had ever felt underestimated or dismissed. It wasn't just about the waitress defending herself. It was about standing up for every person who had ever been made to feel small because of their circumstances. As the waitress walked away, her posture was different. She wasn't walking in the same way she had when she first entered the restaurant. There was a confidence in her step now, a quiet pride in the way she carried herself. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a person who had faced challenges, had overcome them, and had found the courage to speak up when it mattered most. It was as if, in that moment, she had shed the weight of all the judgment and insecurities that had followed her throughout her life. The wealthy girl sat in stunned silence, her face now pale and flushed with embarrassment. Her friends, who had been laughing only moments ago, were now awkwardly looking at each other. No one seemed to know what to say, and the moment of tension seemed to stretch on endlessly. The atmosphere had shifted from one of casual enjoyment to something much more serious, something that was impossible to ignore. The wealthy girl's once brash attitude had vanished, replaced by a sudden awareness of how her words had affected someone else. The patrons around the room were whispering, sharing glances and nodding in agreement. They had witnessed something rare, someone who had been made to feel small, taking back their dignity and standing tall. The waitress's words weren't just a comeback. They were a reminder that no one should ever be made to feel lesser because of their background or their job. It was a lesson about respect, about the power of speaking your truth and the importance of standing up for yourself. As the waitress continued to serve other tables, her steps seemed lighter, her smile more genuine. She had done something she never thought she would. She had spoken up for herself and made a statement that would echo far beyond the walls of the restaurant. The rich girl's insults had lost their power, and the waitress had gained something even more valuable, a new sense of confidence that would carry her through every challenge that lay ahead. And as the night went on, it became clear to everyone in the restaurant that the true lesson of the evening wasn't about wealth or status. It was about respect, respect for oneself and for others, and the power of finding your voice when it matters most. The wealthy girl, now silent, would carry the weight of that lesson for a long time. As the evening went on, the energy in the restaurant remained noticeably different. The wealthy girl and her friends were no longer the center of attention. The table that had once been filled with loud laughter and smug remarks now sat in an awkward silence. The air seemed heavy, like everyone was waiting for something, but no one knew quite what. Even the people at the nearby tables, who had been looking on in quiet curiosity, couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. It wasn't just the silence that lingered. It was the realization that something powerful had taken place. The waitress, however, was no longer focused on what had just unfolded. She had made her point, and in doing so, she had found something inside herself that she had never known was missing: her own voice. She continued working, serving her other customers with the same care and attention that she always did. But there was a subtle difference in the way she moved, in the way she smiled. She walked with a quiet confidence, knowing that she had stood up for herself in a way that would be remembered long after the night was over. In the back of her mind, the waitress couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not because she had won some argument or made the rich girl feel embarrassed, but because she had done something she had never thought herself capable of. She had found the courage to stand up to someone who had tried to diminish her, and in doing so, she had reminded herself of her own worth. That, more than anything, was what made the night unforgettable. Back at the wealthy girl's table, the mood was different. The friends who had once joined in the mocking laughter now sat in uncomfortable silence, avoiding eye contact with each other. They were no longer the group of people who could sit and laugh at others. They were now the ones left unsure of how to act. The wealthy girl herself was visibly shaken. Her usual confidence had been replaced by an uneasy, almost apologetic, expression. For the first time, she seemed to realize that her behavior had consequences. It wasn't just about her status or the things she had. It was about how she treated others. And in that moment, she understood that respect for people mattered far more than anything she could buy. As the night drew to a close, the wealthy girl quietly paid the bill, her friends now talking among themselves in hushed tones. The waitress, meanwhile, continued with her duties, unaffected by the small group of people who had once made her feel so small. She had learned something important about herself that night, that no matter where you come from or what others might think, your voice and your dignity are yours to protect. The experience had changed her, and in a way, it had changed everyone who had witnessed it. The story of what happened that night would likely be shared among the restaurant staff, among the customers who had been there. But for the waitress, the real victory wasn't in the gossip that would follow. It was in the quiet confidence she carried with her when she walked out the door. She had stood up for herself, and that made all the difference. As she left the restaurant at the end of her shift, the stars twinkling above, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a step towards something greater. And she knew that no matter where life took her, no matter what challenges she faced, she would always have the strength to speak her truth and stand tall.